Now let's begin. The highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon in the October twilight. Damon Wagner kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console of his Ford F-150. In the rearview mirror, he could see his son Loren in the back seat, face pressed against the window, watching the cornfields blur past. "You sure you're okay spending the weekend at Uncle Marshall's?" Damon asked, adjusting the mirror. "Yeah, Dad." Lauren's voice was quiet, almost too quiet. The 9-year-old had been subdued since they'd left their house in Cedar Rapids 2 hours ago. Damon frowned. His son was usually excited about visiting his uncle and aunt. Marshall Nielsen lived on a sprawling property outside Des Moines, complete with a workshop, ATVs, and enough land for a kid to explore. But something felt different this time. "Your Aunt Carla said she's making her famous mac and cheese." Damon tried again. "Cool." Lauren's response was automatic, his attention still fixed on the passing landscape. Damon wanted to press further, but he'd learned over the past year, since the divorce, that sometimes Loren needed space to work through his feelings. The split from his ex-wife had been brutal, a slow-motion collapse of a marriage that had started with promise and ended in bitter silence. Carla wasn't his ex-wife, though. She was his younger sister, and Marshall was her husband of 12 years. If there was any stable family foundation left for Loren, it was with them. The turnoff to Marshall's property appeared, marked by a wooden sign that read Nielsen Ranch in hand-carved letters. The gravel driveway crunched under the truck's tires as they approached the sprawling single-story house with its attached 3-car garage. Marshall's black Silverado sat in the driveway, still dusty from whatever construction site he'd been working that week. Marshall Nielsen ran a contracting business, specializing in commercial builds around the greater Des Moines area. He'd done well for himself. Too well, some might say, for someone who'd started with nothing but a high school diploma and a willingness to work 18-hour days. The house, the land, the toys, it all spoke to a level of success that had always impressed Damon, even if it occasionally sparked a twinge of envy. Damon had taken a different path. After 6 years in the Army as a combat engineer, he'd returned to civilian life and earned a degree in mechanical engineering. Now he worked for a manufacturing firm in Cedar Rapids, designing industrial machinery. Good money, stable work, but nothing like Marshall's apparent wealth. The front door opened before Damon could knock. Marshall filled the doorway, 6'3" and built like someone who still did physical labor despite running the company. His smile was broad, genuine. "There's my favorite nephew." Marshall boomed, reaching out to ruffle Lauren's hair. Loren flinched slightly, a movement so subtle Damon almost missed it before forcing a smile. "Hi, Uncle Marshall." "Damon." Marshall's handshake was firm, his other hand clapping Damon on the shoulder. "Good to see you, brother. Carla's in the kitchen. Come on in." The house smelled like garlic and baking cheese. Carla appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face lighting up when she saw Loren. At 36, she was 4 years younger than Damon, with the same dark hair and sharp blue eyes that ran in the Wagner family. "There's my favorite nephew," she said, echoing her husband's words, but with more warmth. She pulled Loren into a hug, and this time, Damon noticed his son didn't tense up. They stayed for dinner, making small talk about work, school, and the upcoming holidays. Marshall dominated the conversation, as usual, regaling them with stories from his latest project, a massive warehouse complex on the south side of Des Moines. Loren picked at his mac and cheese, offering single-word responses when addressed. "You feeling okay, buddy?" Carla asked, concern creasing her forehead. "Just tired," Loren mumbled. When it was time to leave, Damon walked Loren to the guest room where his overnight bag waited. "You sure everything's all right? If you want to come home with me." "I'm fine, Dad." Lauren's voice was firmer now, more insistent. "Really?" Damon studied his son's face, looking for any sign of distress. Finding none obvious, he nodded. "Okay, but you call me if you need anything. Anytime. You know that, right?" "I know." They walked back to the front door together. Marshall and Carla stood on the porch, Marshall's arm draped casually around his wife's shoulders. The picture of domestic contentment. "We'll have him back Sunday evening," Marshall said. "Thinking about taking him out on the ATVs tomorrow if the weather holds." "Sounds great." Damon gave Loren one last hug, then headed down the porch steps. He was halfway to his truck when he felt small fingers press something into his palm. Loren had followed him, moving quietly. The boy's face was serious, his eyes holding something Damon couldn't quite identify. Fear? Determination? What's this? Damon started to look down. Don't read until you're home, Loren whispered urgently. Promise me. The intensity in his son's voice stopped Damon cold. Loren. Promise, Dad. Okay, I promise. Loren nodded once, then turned and ran back to the porch where Marshall and Carla stood watching. Damon slipped whatever it was into his jacket pocket without looking, waved goodbye, and climbed into his truck. The drive back to Cedar Rapids took 2 hours, but it felt like 4. Damon's hand kept drifting to his pocket, feeling the folded paper there. Every instinct screamed at him to pull over and read it, but he'd made a promise. His house was dark when he arrived, a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet subdivision. After the divorce, he'd kept the house and bought out his ex-wife's share. It had seemed important at the time to give Loren stability, a consistent home base. Now the place just felt empty on the weekends when his son wasn't there. Damon locked the door behind him, flipped on the lights, and pulled out the paper. It was a piece of notebook paper, folded into a small square. Lauren's handwriting, usually neat for a 9-year-old, was rushed and messy. Dad, check Uncle Marshall's garage freezer tonight. Bottom shelf. He doesn't know I saw it. Please be careful. Don't tell Aunt Carla. Damon read it 3 times, his pulse quickening with each pass. He doesn't know I saw it. Saw what? And why the secrecy? Why not tell Carla? Damon's first instinct was to call Loren, but that would alert Marshall and Carla that something was wrong. His second instinct was to call his sister, but the note explicitly said not to. Please be careful. That phrase bothered him most of all. What had Loren seen that made him worried for his father's safety? Damon moved through his house mechanically, his mind racing. Marshall had a garage freezer. He'd bought it a few years back, one of those massive chest freezers for storing bulk meat and frozen goods. It sat in the garage bay furthest from the house, the one Marshall used for storage and his woodworking hobby. The smart thing would be to call the police. Let them handle whatever this was. But handle what exactly? A 9-year-old's cryptic note? They'd laugh him out of the station, or worse, they'd call Marshall and Carla, cause a scene, and Loren would face the consequences of his father overreacting. Damon looked at the clock, 8:47 p.m. He could drive back now, but Marshall and Carla would still be awake. The note said to check tonight, which meant Loren expected him to be discreet. He made coffee, strong coffee. Then he sat at his kitchen table and tried to think logically. Marshall had always been a bit of an enigma. He'd married Carla 12 years ago, shortly after Damon had returned from his second deployment in Afghanistan. Marshall had been working construction then, just another guy swinging a hammer. But he'd been smart about it, saved his money, took risks. Within 5 years, he'd started his own contracting company. Within 10, he was bidding on major commercial projects. That kind of success was rare, especially in a competitive market like Des Moines. Damon had always assumed Marshall was just good at what he did, a hard worker with a knack for business. But what if there was more to it? Damon thought about his son, alone in that house with whatever secret he'd discovered. Loren was smart, observant, careful. If he'd taken the risk of passing that note, if he'd been specific enough to mention the bottom shelf of a particular freezer, then he'd seen something significant. The hours crawled by. Damon dozed on his couch, setting an alarm for 2:30 a.m. When it buzzed, he jolted awake, heart pounding. He dressed in dark clothes, jeans, a black jacket, dark boots. From his closet, he retrieved a lockpick set he'd kept from his army days. He'd been trained in bypass entry during his time as a combat engineer, a skill he'd never expected to use on family. The drive back to Marshall's property was surreal, like moving through a dream. The highway was empty, just the occasional semi-truck barreling through the darkness. Damon turned off his headlights a quarter mile from the Nielsen property, letting his truck roll silently down the gravel road. He parked in a grove of trees about 200 yards from the house and approached on foot, his breath misting in the cold October air. The house was dark, no lights visible except for a dim glow from what he remembered was the master bedroom, probably Marshall's phone as he scrolled before sleep. The garage had a side entrance, a simple deadbolt that took Damon less than 30 seconds to defeat. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Marshall's woodworking bench dominated one wall, covered in hand tools and half-finished projects. The 3 bays held the Silverado, Carla's Honda CR-V, and the storage bay with the freezer. Damon used his phone's flashlight, keeping it pointed low. The chest freezer was exactly where he remembered, a massive white Kenmore against the back wall. His hands were steady as he lifted the lid. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of frozen meat. The top shelf was packed with steaks, chicken breasts, bags of frozen vegetables, normal household stuff. Damon carefully lifted the top basket, setting it aside. The bottom shelf held larger items wrapped in butcher paper and vacuum-sealed bags. Damon moved them aside, his flashlight beam playing across the white interior. Then he saw it. Beneath the frozen meat, hidden under a false bottom made of white plastic board, was a metal container. Military olive drab, about 2 feet long and 8 inches wide. Stenciled on the side in yellow letters. Classified. Authorized personnel only. Damon's blood turned to ice. His hands shook as he lifted the container free. It was heavy, maybe 20 pounds. There was a combination lock on the front, but the mechanism had been broken, the door hanging slightly ajar. Damon set the container on the concrete floor and opened it fully. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, were 6 cylindrical devices, each about the size of a soup can. They were matte black with red bands around the middle and small LED displays on top. Damon recognized them immediately. He'd seen similar devices during his time in the military. Detonators. Military-grade electronic detonators, the kind used for controlled demolitions and, in the wrong hands, for creating sophisticated explosive devices. But it wasn't just the detonators. There were also 3 small hard drives, the kind used for classified data, each with serial numbers and military markings. And beneath those, wrapped in plastic, were documents, blueprints, schematics, pages stamped with classification levels that made Damon's stomach turn. He photographed everything with his phone, his hands trembling. Then he carefully replaced the container, the false bottom, and the frozen meat, arranging everything exactly as he'd found it. The walk back to his truck felt like moving through mud. His mind raced, trying to process what he'd discovered. Marshall wasn't just successful. Marshall was a criminal. He was stealing and storing classified military equipment and documents. The questions piled up. How had Marshall gotten access to this material? Was he selling it? Was he planning to use it? And most importantly, how had Loren discovered it? Damon sat in his truck for 10 minutes, trying to steady his breathing. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call he'd hoped never to make again. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. This better be good. Do you know what time it is? Colonel Briggs, it's Damon Wagner. I need to report something. Something urgent. There was a pause. Wagner? From the 86th Engineer Battalion. Yes, sir. I'm sorry to call at this hour, but I've discovered classified military materials in a civilian location. Detonators, hard drives, documents. All clearly marked classified. The sleep cleared from Briggs' voice immediately. Where are you? Outside Des Moines, Iowa. The materials are in my brother-in-law's garage freezer. Don't touch anything else. I'm activating a response team. Give me the exact address. Damon rattled off Marshall's address, then added, Sir, my 9-year-old son is in that house. He's the one who discovered this. I need him safe. We'll handle it. Stay where you are. Someone will be there within 2 hours. The call ended. Damon sat in the darkness, watching Marshall's house, and waited for dawn. The black SUVs arrived at 5:47 a.m., just as the sky was beginning to lighten. For vehicles, all with government plates, moving fast but silent. Damon had moved his truck back to the main road, where a man in a dark suit intercepted him. Mr. Wagner? Agent Chun, OSI. The Office of Special Investigations, military police for the Air Force, but they handled cross-branch cases involving classified materials. Colonel Briggs briefed me. We need to extract your son first, then secure the residence. Marshall Nielsen is former military? Damon asked. No record of service, Chin said grimly. Which makes this worse. We need you to call your sister, get her to bring your son outside. Make it seem routine. Damon's hands shook as he dialed Carla's number. It rang 6 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep. Damon? What's wrong? It's not even 6. Carla, I need you to do something for me. Don't ask questions, just trust me. Get Loren and bring him outside. Just you and Loren. Tell Marshall you're taking him to get donuts or something. What? Damon, what's going on? Please, Carla. I'll explain everything, but I need you to trust me right now. There was a long pause. Damon could hear shuffling in the background, Marshall's voice asking groggily what was going on. "Give me 5 minutes," Carla finally said. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. Damon stood next to Agent Chun, watching the house. Tactical teams were positioned around the property, invisible in the pre-dawn darkness. The garage door opened. Carla's Honda backed out, and Damon could see his sister at the wheel, Loren in the passenger seat. The boy was wearing his pajamas and a jacket. Carla drove halfway down the driveway before Agent Chun stepped into the headlight beams, hand raised. She slammed on the brakes, and Damon ran forward. "Dad!" Lauren's voice was small, scared, as Damon pulled open the passenger door. "You're okay, buddy. You're safe now." Damon unbuckled his son and pulled him into a fierce hug. "Damon, what the hell is this?" Carla demanded, climbing out of the car. Then she saw the tactical teams emerging from the darkness, saw the government vehicles, and her face went white. "Oh my God, what did Marshall do?" Before Damon could answer, the front door of the house burst open. Marshall stood there in sweats and a t-shirt, taking in the scene. For just a moment, his face registered shock. Then it smoothed into something calculating, dangerous. He didn't run. That was the first surprise. Instead, Marshall raised his hand slowly, stepping onto the porch. "I assume you have a warrant?" His voice was calm, almost amused. Agent Chun approached with a document. "Mr. Marshall Nielsen, you are under investigation for possession of classified materials, theft of government property, and suspected espionage. This is a warrant to search your property and seize any materials related to these charges." Marshall's eyes found Damon across the lawn. "This was you." It wasn't a question. Damon felt his sister's hand grip his arm, her fingers digging in. "Damon," Carla's voice broke. "What did you do?" "What he had to," Loren said quietly. The 9-year-old stood straighter, meeting his uncle's gaze with unexpected courage. "I saw what you had in there, Uncle Marshall. Last month, when I was looking for the ice cream sandwiches." Marshall's jaw tightened. "You were supposed to be in bed. You were supposed to be a good person," Loren shot back. Damon felt a surge of pride in his son, even as agents moved past them into the garage. It took them less than 5 minutes to find the container. "Sir, we've located the materials," an agent called out. "Everything the witness described, plus more." Plus more. Those 2 words seemed to deflate Marshall's composure. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, something like fear crossed his face. "Mr. Nielsen, turn around and place your hands behind your back," Agent Chun said. As they cuffed him, Marshall looked at Carla. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to find out this way." "Find out what?" Carla's voice was shrill, panicked. "Marshall, what did you do?" But Marshall was already being led to one of the SUVs, and Agent Chun was steering Damon, Loren, and Carla toward another vehicle. "We'll need statements from all of you," Chun said. "Mr. Wagner, your son may have saved lives today. Those detonators could have ended up in very wrong hands." The Des Moines field office was a nondescript building downtown. Damon spent 6 hours being debriefed, going over every detail of the previous night. Loren was interviewed by a specialist trained in talking to children, with Damon present the whole time. "I wasn't snooping," Loren explained earnestly. "I really was just looking for ice cream. The freezer was making a funny noise, and I thought maybe something was wrong with it. I saw Aunt Carla rearranging stuff in there earlier, so I figured I could do the same. That's when I felt the false bottom. It moved when I pressed on it." "And you didn't tell your aunt?" the specialist asked gently. Loren shook his head. "I opened it a little bit and saw the case. It looked military, like Dad's old stuff. And I heard Uncle Marshall coming, so I closed everything real quick. But I knew it was wrong. Dad always taught me that if something feels wrong, it probably is." Damon squeezed his son's hand. "You did the right thing, Loren." The truth came out slowly, pieced together by multiple agencies over the following days. Marshall Nielsen had been running a theft and resale operation for over 5 years, stealing classified materials from military installations and selling them to foreign buyers. He'd used his contracting business as cover, taking jobs on or near military bases, using his crew to gain access to secured areas. The hard drives contained blueprints for current military installations in Eastern Europe. The detonators were part of a shipment that had been reported missing from Fort Leonard Wood 6 months earlier. Marshall had been in the process of arranging a sale to a buyer in Belarus, a transaction that would have netted him over $2 million. Carla was cleared of any involvement. She'd known nothing, had been as deceived as everyone else. Damon watched his sister crumble as the full scope of Marshall's betrayal became clear. 12 years of marriage, built on lies. I kept thinking he was just good at business, she said, sitting in Damon's living room a week later. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face hollow. The money, the house, all of it. I thought he was just working hard. He fooled everyone, Damon said gently. Did he? Carla's laugh was bitter. Because your 9-year-old son figured it out in 5 minutes of looking for ice cream. Loren, playing video games in the next room, called out. It was weird. Good people don't hide military stuff in freezers. Despite everything, Damon felt himself smile. His son had an uncomplicated view of right and wrong, a moral clarity that adults often lost. And that clarity had potentially prevented a disaster. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks after Marshall's arrest. Damon expected to feel some kind of satisfaction, seeing his former brother-in-law in shackles, facing federal charges. Instead, he felt hollow, watching Carla sit in the courtroom gallery, tears streaming silently down her face. Marshall pled not guilty, but his lawyer looked grim. The evidence was overwhelming. Beyond what Damon had found, investigators had discovered detailed records in Marshall's home office, transactions, contacts, shipment records. He'd been meticulous in his documentation, perhaps too confident he'd never be caught. The government will seek the maximum sentence, the prosecutor informed Damon after the hearing. Espionage, theft of government property, possession of explosive devices with intent to distribute. He's looking at 30 years minimum, possibly life. Good, Damon said, though the word tasted wrong. Not because Marshall didn't deserve it, but because of the collateral damage. Carla's life was destroyed. She was selling the house, moving back to Cedar Rapids to be closer to family. She'd started therapy, trying to process the trauma of discovering her entire marriage had been a lie. But the story didn't end there. It never does. 2 weeks after the hearing, Damon received a phone call from Agent Chun. We need to meet. There's been a development. They met at a coffee shop in Cedar Rapids, Chun in civilian clothes, looking tired. Marshall Nielsen is cooperating, he said without preamble. He's giving us names, his buyers, his contacts, other people involved in the network. That's good, isn't it? Damon asked. It means he's trying to reduce his sentence. And his lawyer has made an unusual request. He wants a meeting between Marshall and you. Why? I don't know, but I thought you should be aware. You're under no obligation to agree. Damon thought about it for 3 days before deciding. There were things he needed to know, questions that gnawed at him in the dark hours of the night. He agreed to the meeting. The Federal Detention Center was a squat concrete building, all razor wire and reinforced glass. They brought Marshall to a small conference room, his hands cuffed in front of him, an orange jumpsuit replacing his usual expensive casual wear. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt, but his eyes were still sharp. Damon, Marshall said, sitting down across the metal table. A guard stood by the door, Agent Chin next to him. You wanted to see me. I wanted to apologize. Marshall's voice was rough. Not for getting caught. I'm not that big a hypocrite. But for dragging your family into this. For making Carla a widow to a living man. You made choices, Damon said flatly. Every one of them was yours. I did. Marshall leaned back, chains rattling. You want to know why? Everyone always wants to know why. I don't care why. Bullshit. You're here, aren't you? Marshall smiled without humor. The money was good. Really good. But it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about beating the system. All those years in construction, watching officers and contractors and bureaucrats get rich off government contracts while guys like me did the actual work, I wanted to flip it. Take from them. Profit from their waste and corruption. So you became exactly what you hated, Damon observed. Brilliant. Marshall's jaw tightened. You always were self-righteous. Mr. Perfect Soldier, Mr. Perfect Engineer. Did everything by the book. And where did it get you? A middle-class house and a failed marriage. It got me the ability to look my son in the eye, Damon said coldly. Can you say the same? That hit home. Marshall looked away. Lauren's a smart kid. He'll be fine. No thanks to you. You put him in danger the moment you brought that stuff into your home. If those buyers had found out he'd seen something, Damon cut himself off, hands clenching into fists. They wouldn't have hurt a kid. You don't know that. You gambled with his life. With Carla's life. And for what? Money? Pride. Marshall was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. I want you to know I'm cooperating. The network goes deep. Procurement officers, supply sergeants, even a major at Fort Bragg. They're going to roll up the whole operation because of me. You want credit for cleaning up your own mess? I want you to tell Carla I'm trying to make it right. As much as I can. You can't make this right, Damon said, standing. There is no making this right. You broke her, Marshall. You broke her faith in everything. That doesn't get fixed because you named names to reduce your sentence. Damon, we're done here. Damon walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope the 30 years feels like 60. He left Marshall sitting at that table, and he didn't look back. Winter came early to Iowa that year. By Thanksgiving, snow covered the fields, and the world felt clean and new in that way fresh snow can make even the darkest things seem temporarily pure. Carla hosted Thanksgiving at Damon's house. She'd sold the property, unable to bear living there anymore, and moved into an apartment in Cedar Rapids. She was seeing a therapist twice a week, trying to rebuild her sense of self. The divorce was proceeding, and Marshall wasn't contesting anything. I don't want anything that came from him, Carla said, helping Damon prepare the turkey. Not the money, not the property, nothing. The lawyers say I'm entitled to half of everything, but I told them to donate my share to charity. Military family support organizations. Figure it's fitting. You sure? Damon asked. I'm sure. I just want to forget he ever existed. But forgetting wasn't possible, not really. Marshall's arrest had made national news. The trial was scheduled for March, and prosecutors were building a case that would likely result in life imprisonment. The network Marshall had exposed included 19 people across 4 states, and the damage assessment was still ongoing. Millions of dollars in stolen materials, compromised installations, security breaches that would take years to fully repair. Loren seemed to be handling it better than the adults. He'd had a few sessions with a child psychologist, but mostly, he'd moved on. To him, it was simple. Uncle Marshall had done something bad, got caught, and would face consequences. Justice worked the way it was supposed to. Dad, Loren asked on Thanksgiving evening, after Carla had left and they were cleaning up. Are you mad at me? What? Why would I be mad at you? Because I broke up Aunt Carla's family. If I hadn't told you. Damon knelt down, putting himself at eye level with his son. Listen to me. You did not break up anything. Marshall did that all by himself, long before you found that freezer. All you did was stop something bad from getting worse. You protected people. Maybe people you'll never meet, in places you'll never go, but they're safer because you were brave enough to tell me what you saw. Uncle Marshall was nice to me, though, Loren said softly. I like going to his house. I like playing with the ATVs and stuff. I know, and it's okay to feel confused about that. People aren't always all good or all bad. Marshall was nice to you, and he was also doing something terrible. Both things can be true. Grown-ups are complicated, Loren sighed. Yeah, buddy. We really are. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence. Later, after Loren was in bed, Damon sat alone in his living room, looking at a photo from better days. A family barbecue from 3 years ago, Marshall at the grill, Carla laughing at something, Loren running through a sprinkler. Everyone happy, everyone oblivious to the rot underneath. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Chun. Thought you should know. Nielsen's cooperation led to the arrest of Major Daniels at Bragg. Guy was the linchpin of the whole operation. This is going to save lives. Your son's a hero. Damon typed back. He's just a kid who knew right from wrong. That's what makes him a hero. Damon looked at the photo again, then put it face down in a drawer. Some memories needed to be put away. The trial began in March, a gray morning with sleet tapping against the courthouse windows. Damon attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Carla. Loren didn't have to testify. His statements to investigators were entered as evidence. But the judge ruled that making a 9-year-old face his uncle in court was unnecessary given the overwhelming physical evidence. The prosecution built their case methodically. They brought in military witnesses who testified about the significance of the stolen materials. They presented transaction records showing Marshall's communications with foreign buyers. They played recorded phone calls where Marshall discussed prices and delivery methods, his voice casual as he brokered deals that endangered national security. Marshall's defense was that he'd been coerced, that larger players in the network had threatened him and his family. It was a weak argument, contradicted by his own meticulous records showing he'd initiated contact with buyers, negotiated prices, arranged logistics. He'd been the architect of his own operation, not a victim. On the 8th day of the trial, the prosecution called Damon to the stand. "Mr. Wagner, please describe your relationship with the defendant," the prosecutor began. "Marshall Nielsen is my brother-in-law. He's married to my younger sister, Carla." "And you trusted him?" "Completely. He was family." "Tell the court about the night of October 14th of last year." Damon walked through the events, the note from Loren, the decision to investigate, the discovery in the freezer, the call to Colonel Briggs. He kept his voice steady, professional, but inside he felt the rage building again. When Marshall's defense attorney cross-examined him, the questions were predictable. How did he know the materials were classified? Couldn't they have been props? Legal replicas? Had he considered that Marshall might have been holding them for someone else? "The serial numbers were real," Damon said. "The classification markings were authentic. And the hard drives contained actual classified schematics. I saw them when the OSI opened the devices. There's no innocent explanation for what was in that freezer. But you broke into your brother-in-law's garage in the middle of the night to protect my son, who had discovered evidence of a federal crime." A 9-year-old's interpretation. A 9-year-old who was smart enough to recognize something wrong when he saw it. Damon interrupted. "My son has more integrity than your client ever did." The judge gavelled for order, but the point was made. The defense had nothing, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. They laid out not just Marshall's crimes, but the consequences. Intelligence sources had been compromised. Security protocols had to be completely revamped at 3 military installations. Ongoing operations in Eastern Europe had been jeopardized, and the buyers Marshall had dealt with were connected to groups hostile to American interests. Marshall Nielsen didn't just steal from the government, the prosecutor said. He betrayed his country. He put service members at risk. He sold out American security for personal profit. The evidence is overwhelming, and the verdict should be equally clear. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Marshall showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, all 18 of them. Carla wept silently, her hand gripping Damon's. Around them, families of the military personnel whose safety had been compromised watched with grim satisfaction. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge was a former Army JAG officer, and her face was stern as she addressed Marshall. "Mr. Nielsen, you have been convicted of crimes that strike at the heart of our national security. You betrayed not just your country, but the men and women who serve it. You endangered lives for profit. The court finds no mitigating factors sufficient to warrant leniency." She sentenced him to 40 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 30. Marshall would be 78 years old before he could even be considered for release. As they led him away, Marshall's eyes found Damon one last time. There was no defiance left, no calculation. Just a hollow acceptance of a future that would be spent behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Damon made a brief statement, thanking the investigators and prosecutors, praising his son's courage, asking for privacy for his family. Then he drove Carla home, made sure she was okay, and headed back to his own house. Loren was with Damon's parents for the day, spared from the media circus. When Damon picked him up that evening, his son asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Is Uncle Marshall going to jail for a long time?" "Yes, a very long time." "Good," Loren said firmly. "He did something really bad." "He did." They drove home in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The kind that comes after a storm, when the air is clear and the world feels right again. Spring brought renewal. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath, and soon that brown turned green as new growth pushed through. Carla started dating again, cautiously, an accountant she'd met through her therapist's referral. She laughed more, slowly reclaiming pieces of herself. Damon received a commendation from the Department of Defense, a formal letter thanking him for his service to national security. They invited him and Loren to Washington for a ceremony, but he declined. He didn't need recognition. He just needed his son to be safe and his sister to heal. But one evening in late April, Colonel Briggs called personally. "Wagner, I know you turned down the ceremony, but there's something else. The people involved in the network Marshall exposed, they're all in custody now. Every last one. Operations are being secured, protocols improved. You and your son prevented something catastrophic. My son did, sir. I just followed his lead. Then he has a hell of a future ahead of him. I wanted you to know, though, there's been talk about making this case into a training scenario. Teaching intelligence personnel what to watch for, how civilian cooperation can make a difference. If we do that, would you be willing to have your story shared? Anonymized, of course. Damon thought about it. If it helps, yes. But leave my son out of it as much as possible. He's 9. He shouldn't be defined by this. Understood. Thank you, Wagner. Your country owes you a debt. My country doesn't owe me anything, sir. I was just a dad protecting his kid. That's what makes you the right person for this story. After the call ended, Damon sat on his back porch, watching Loren play in the yard. The boy was building something with branches and twine, his face serious with concentration. So normal, so innocent, so impossibly brave when it mattered. A year ago, Damon's world had been defined by his failed marriage, his sense of inadequacy compared to Marshall's success, his quiet fear that he wasn't providing enough for his son. Now all of that seemed absurd. Marshall's success had been a lie. The expensive house, the toys, the lifestyle, all bought with betrayal and blood money. Meanwhile, Damon had raised a son who knew right from wrong, who had the courage to speak up when he saw something terrible, who understood that family meant protecting each other, not using each other. That was the real success. That was what mattered. Dad, Loren called out. Come see what I built. Damon walked across the lawn to where his son stood proudly next to a precarious structure that might have been a fort or a tower or possibly a modern art installation. It's amazing, Damon said, and meant it. It's not done yet, Loren explained. But I figured out if I tie the branches this way, they're stronger together than apart. That's pretty smart. Uncle Marshall used to say everyone has to look out for themselves first, Loren said thoughtfully. But I think he was wrong. I think people are stronger when they look out for each other. Damon felt his throat tighten. Yeah, buddy. I think you're absolutely right. They worked on the fort together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, Iowa stretched out in all directions, vast and steady and home. Somewhere in a federal prison, Marshall Nielsen was beginning a sentence that would likely last until he died. Somewhere in Cedar Rapids, Carla was learning to laugh again. And here, in this moment, a father and son built something together, branch by branch, stronger than either could have been alone. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but as close as the world allowed. And for Damon Wagner, that was enough. 5 years later, on a bright Saturday morning in June, Damon stood in his driveway watching Loren, now 14, and somehow already taller than his father, load camping gear into the truck. You sure you packed everything? Damon asked for the 3rd time. Yes, Dad. Tent, sleeping bags, the camp stove, food, water purification tablets, first aid kit. I made a checklist. Loren waved a piece of paper covered in neat handwriting. You taught me, remember? Damon smiled. He had taught him. Over the years since Marshall's arrest, he'd made it a point to teach Loren everything he knew. How to read people, how to trust his instincts, how to prepare for emergencies, but also how to be kind, how to forgive, how to build rather than destroy. Carla pulled up in her new Subaru, her fiancé Ben in the passenger seat. She'd remarried the previous fall, a quiet ceremony with just family. Ben Garrett was a good man, steady and honest, an elementary school teacher who made Carla laugh and never once tried to impress anyone with material wealth. Ready for your camping trip? Carla called out, getting out of the car. Born ready, Loren replied, grinning. They were heading to the Boundary Waters, a father-son trip that had been planned for months. 3 days of canoeing, fishing, and sleeping under the stars. No phones, no distractions, just the wilderness and each other. You be careful up there, Carla said, hugging her nephew. And listen to your dad. Always do, Loren said. Carla hugged Damon next, squeezing tight. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being you. For raising him right. For being there when everything fell apart. You're my sister. Where else would I be? She pulled back, eyes shining. I know. But still, thank you. They said their goodbyes, and Damon and Loren hit the road, heading north toward Minnesota. The radio played classic rock, the windows were down, and the June air smelled like summer and possibility. Dad, Loren said, somewhere around the Iowa-Minnesota border. Yeah. I was thinking about that night. When I gave you the note, they didn't talk about it often anymore. It had become part of their family history, a defining moment that shaped everything that came after, but not something they dwelled on. What about it? I was scared, Loren admitted. Really scared. I thought maybe Uncle Marshall would find out, that he'd hurt you, or Aunt Carla or me. But I knew I had to tell you anyway. That's what courage is, Damon said. Being scared but doing the right thing anyway. I know. But the thing is, I wasn't just scared of Uncle Marshall. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. That you'd think I was making it up, or overreacting. Damon glanced at his son, seeing the 14-year-old, but remembering the 9-year-old who'd slipped that note into his hand. Did you really think I wouldn't believe you? I didn't know. But I hoped. And you did believe me. You always believe me. Because you've never given me a reason not to, Damon said. You're honest, you're smart, and you pay attention to the world around you. Those are rare qualities, Loren. Don't ever lose them. I won't, Loren promised. Then, after a pause, do you think Uncle Marshall is sorry? Like really sorry. It was a question Damon had asked himself many times. I think he's sorry he got caught. Whether he's sorry for what he did, truly sorry in a way that means he understands the harm he caused, I don't know. Maybe. Prison changes people. Sometimes for the better. But you don't talk to him. No. Why not? Damon considered his answer carefully. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending something didn't happen or that the harm wasn't real. Marshall made choices that hurt a lot of people, your aunt most of all. I can forgive him in the sense that I don't wish him more suffering than he's already facing. But I don't need to have him in my life. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. That makes sense, Loren said. Then, thanks for letting me ask about it. You can always ask me anything. That's never going to change. They drove on. The conversation drifting to lighter topics. School, Lauren's summer job at the local community center, the girl he definitely didn't have a crush on but talked about constantly. The miles passed, and the landscape changed, flat Iowa farmland giving way to Minnesota's rolling hills and forests. That night, they set up camp beside a pristine lake, so clear they could see rocks on the bottom even in the fading light. They cooked dinner over the camp stove, burned their marshmallows to perfect charcoal crispiness, and lay on their backs watching the stars emerge. There's so many of them, Loren breathed. Light pollution in the city makes it hard to see them all, Damon explained. But they're always there. You just have to get somewhere dark enough to see them. Is that a metaphor? Damon laughed. Maybe. Truth and justice are like that too. They're always there, even when it's hard to see them. Sometimes you just have to work to bring them into the light. That's pretty deep, Dad. I have my moments. They lay in comfortable silence, the lake lapping gently at the shore, the forest alive with nighttime sounds. Somewhere far away, Marshall Nielsen sat in a cell, serving his sentence. Somewhere closer, Carla slept in the arms of a good man who'd helped her heal. And here, under a sky full of stars, a father and son shared a moment of perfect peace. I'm glad I told you, Loren said quietly. About the freezer. Even though it was scary, even though it changed everything. I'm glad I did the right thing. Me too, buddy, Damon said. Me too. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient light from distant fires, bearing witness to this small moment of connection and love. In the grand scheme of things, it was nothing. Just two people camping by a lake, talking about the past. But in another way, it was everything. It was proof that courage mattered, that truth mattered, that standing up against wrong was worth the cost. Marshall Nielsen had been rich in money but bankrupt in character. He'd built an empire on betrayal and watched it crumble. Meanwhile, Damon Wagner had built something much more valuable, a relationship with his son based on trust, honesty, and love. And unlike Marshall's empire, this foundation would last. Night, Dad, Loren said, yawning. Night, son. Sweet dreams. The fire burned down to embers, and the stars kept their eternal watch. And in the morning, they would wake to a new day full of promise and possibility. That was the real victory, not Marshall's imprisonment, not even the lives that had been saved. The real victory was this, a father and son, together, building a future on a foundation of integrity. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had prevailed. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.